The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Hamilton, Nevada, and Clara Hayes threw herself behind the nearest rain barrel, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. It was August 1878, and the silver mining town had seen its share of violence, but this particular afternoon had turned deadly in the span of a heartbeat when two drunken miners decided to settle their dispute with lead instead of words. Clara pressed herself against the weathered wood of the general store, her cotton dress already covered in the fine dust that seemed to coat everything in this high desert town. She had been on her way to the boarding house where she rented a small room, carrying a basket of bread and dried beans, and now she was trapped between two buildings while bullets flew overhead. The sharp crack of gunfire made her flinch, and she squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to be anywhere but here. "Madam, you need to move." The voice was deep and calm, startlingly so given the chaos erupting just yards away. Clara's eyes flew open to find a tall man crouched beside her, his broad shoulders blocking some of the afternoon sun. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy, leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. But it was his face that caught her attention, strong-jawed and serious, with eyes the color of aged whiskey that held both concern and an unexpected gentleness. "I cannot move," Clara said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound brave. "They are shooting." "I know, but this barrel is not going to stop a stray bullet if one comes this way." The cowboy glanced over his shoulder, assessing the situation with the practiced ease of someone who had seen trouble before. "When I say go, you run into the store behind us. The door is unlocked. Can you do that?" Clara nodded, though fear had her throat so tight she could barely swallow. She had been living in Hamilton for 3 months now, trying to build a new life far away from the mistakes of her past, and the last thing she needed was to die in some senseless shootout between men too drunk to think straight. "Go." The cowboy moved in front of her, his body a shield as Clara scrambled to her feet and ran the few steps to the door. She grabbed the handle and yanked it open, stumbling inside just as another shot rang out. She turned back, expecting to see the cowboy right behind her, but instead he was still outside, his hand on his gun, watching the street with careful attention. "Get inside," Clara called out, her earlier fear replaced by concern for this stranger who had helped her. "Please." He glanced back at her, and for just a moment their eyes met and held. Then he moved, quick and smooth, slipping through the door and pulling it shut behind him. The sound of gunfire continued outside, but muffled now, and Clara found herself standing in the dim interior of Henderson's general store with this cowboy who had quite possibly saved her life. "Thank you," she managed, her hands still shaking as she set down her basket, which she had somehow managed to hold onto through the entire ordeal. "Just glad you are safe." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, dusty from the trail. "Quincy Harlow, madam." "Most people call me Quinn, Clara Hayes." She smoothed her dress, a nervous gesture, suddenly aware of how she must look with dust in her hair and her face flushed from fear and exertion. "I am grateful for your help, Mr. Harlow. Quinn is fine." He moved to the window, peering out through the gap in the curtains. "Looks like the sheriff has arrived. Should be over soon." Clara joined him at the window, careful to stay back from the glass. Sure enough, Sheriff Morrison and his deputy were out in the street, guns drawn, shouting at the miners to drop their weapons. The shooting had stopped, replaced by angry yelling and the sheriff's authoritative voice cutting through it all. Within minutes, both miners were in custody, being marched toward the jail, and the street was returning to its normal afternoon quiet. I have never seen anything like that, Clara admitted, her voice soft. Back in Ohio, where I grew up, we did not have gunfights in the middle of the day. Hamilton is a rough town, Quinn said, turning to face her fully now that the danger had passed. Silver brings all kinds, and not all of them are good men. What brings a woman from Ohio to Nevada? It was an innocent question, the kind of polite inquiry that people made when getting to know one another, but Clara felt her chest tighten anyway. She could not tell him the truth, could not admit that she had come here to escape a past that would ruin her if anyone knew about it. So she did what she had been doing since she arrived. She lied. A fresh start, she said, which was true enough in its way. After my parents passed, there was nothing keeping me in Ohio. I wanted to see something different, somewhere new. Quinn nodded, accepting her explanation without question. Takes courage to come all this way alone. Are you working here in town? I am a seamstress, Clara said, grateful to speak truth at last. I do alterations and make dresses for the ladies. It is not much, but it pays for my room and board. Honest work is good work. Quinn glanced toward the door. I should let you get on with your day. I just wanted to make sure you were all right before I left. Are you passing through Hamilton? Clara asked, surprised by the disappointment she felt at the thought of him leaving. She had only just met this man, but there was something about him that made her feel safe, a quality that had been sorely lacking in her life for longer than she cared to admit. Actually, I am staying. Just bought a ranch about 10 miles east of town, up in the Ruby Valley. Been working cattle in Montana for the past few years, saved up enough to buy my own place. There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from hard work and accomplishment. Come into town for supplies today, did not expect to be dodging bullets. Clara found herself smiling despite the lingering fear from earlier. Well, I am very glad you were here, regardless of the circumstances. You are very brave. Not brave, just practical. Could not let a lady get hurt if I could prevent it. Quinn put his hat back on, adjusting it with practiced ease. If you do not mind me asking, where are you headed now? The boarding house on Silver Street. Mrs. Patterson rents rooms there. I know the place. Would you allow me to walk you there? Just to make sure there is no more trouble on the way. Clara hesitated, but only for a moment. In the 3 months she had been in Hamilton, she had kept to herself, afraid that getting close to anyone might lead to questions she could not answer. But Quinn Harlow seemed different somehow, solid and dependable, and the thought of his company on the walk back was more appealing than she wanted to admit. I would appreciate that, she said. They left the store together, stepping out into the bright Nevada sunshine. The street was nearly empty now, just a few curious onlookers dispersing, and the bloodstain on the dirt where one of the miners had been wounded. Clara looked away from it, focusing instead on the familiar storefronts and the mountains rising in the distance, purple and blue against the endless sky. They walked slowly, Quinn matching his longer stride to her pace. He carried her basket without being asked, a small courtesy that touched Clara more than it probably should have. They talked as they walked, easy conversation about the town and the weather and the ranch Quinn was building. He told her about his plans to raise cattle and horses, about the small house that needed work and the creek that ran through the property. Clara listened, drawn in by his enthusiasm and the picture he painted of a life built on hard work and determination. It sounds wonderful, she said honestly. You must be very excited. I am. It is everything I have been working toward. Quinn paused, then added, It gets lonely, though. The ranch, I mean. Just me and my hired hand, a fellow named Pete who is older than dirt but knows more about cattle than anyone I have ever met. There was something in his tone, a note of vulnerability that made Clara look at him more closely. Quinn Harlow was handsome. There was no denying that, but more than that, He seemed genuine in a way that was rare in her experience. Most men she had known wanted something, expected something, but Quinn just seemed content to walk beside her and talk. They reached the boarding house too soon for Clara's liking. It was a two-story building with a wraparound porch, clean and well-maintained by the fastidious Mrs. Patterson. Clara took her basket from Quinn, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange, and she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you again, Mr. Harlow. Quinn," she corrected at his look, "for everything today." "It was my pleasure, Miss Hayes. I hope I will see you again." He tipped his hat to her, that old-fashioned gesture of respect that seemed to come naturally to him. "I come into town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps we might cross paths." "Perhaps," Clara agreed, though in her mind she was already calculating. Saturday was 4 days away. She could find reasons to be in town on Saturdays, could make sure she happened to be near the general store when cowboys came in from the surrounding ranches. She watched him walk away, his tall frame moving with easy confidence down the dusty street, and felt something shift inside her. For 3 months she had been hiding, had been living half a life in fear that someone would discover her secret. But Quinn Harlow made her want to be brave again, made her think that maybe she could have something good and true, despite everything she had done. Clara went inside, climbing the narrow stairs to her room on the 2nd floor. It was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a table by the window where she did her sewing. She set down her basket and moved to the window, looking out over the town. From here she could see the main street, the saloon with its painted sign, the assay office where miners brought their silver ore. It was a hard town, rough around the edges, but it was starting to feel like home. She thought about Quinn and his ranch, about the way he had looked at her with those warm eyes, and for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to hope. Saturday came, bright and hot as August days tended to be in Nevada. Clara dressed carefully in her best summer dress, a pale blue cotton with white piping at the collar and cuffs. She had made it herself, and the fit was perfect, showing off her slim waist and the curve of her hips. She told herself she was not dressing up for anyone in particular, but when she pinned up her dark hair and added a touch of rose oil to her wrists, she knew she was lying. The town was busy when she ventured out, miners and ranch hands spending their week's wages on supplies and entertainment. Clara made her way to the general store, pretending to browse the bolts of fabric while keeping one eye on the door. She had been there perhaps 20 minutes, long enough that she was starting to feel foolish, when Quinn walked in. He saw her immediately, and the smile that spread across his face made Clara's pulse quicken. "Miss Hayes, what a pleasant surprise, Mr. Harlow." She kept her voice light, casual. "I needed some thread for a dress I am working on, and I need just about everything." He gestured to the list in his hand, and Clara could see it was long, filled with the kinds of supplies a working ranch required. "Pete sent me with enough items to fill a wagon. May I help you find things?" The offer came out before Clara could stop herself, and she felt her cheeks warm. "I mean, I know the store fairly well by now. I would appreciate that." Quinn's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Clara felt that flutter again, stronger this time. They spent the next hour moving through the store together, Quinn checking items off his list while Clara pointed out where things were kept. They talked easily, falling into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Quinn told her about the week on the ranch, about breaking a new horse and repairing fence line. Clara told him about the dresses she was making, about Mrs. Patterson's cat that kept trying to sleep on her fabric. When the wagon was loaded and Quinn had paid Mr. Henderson, they stood together on the wooden sidewalk, neither seeming ready to part ways. "Would you like to take a walk?" Quinn asked. I know a spot by the creek just outside town. It is cooler there and prettier than all this dust. Clara knew she should say no. She had been in Hamilton for 3 months without encouraging any man's attention, without letting anyone get close enough to ask questions. But Quinn was different, and the thought of spending more time with him was too appealing to resist. I would like that very much. They walked through town and out past the last buildings, following a narrow path that wound through sagebrush and scrub. The creek was small, fed by snowmelt from the mountains, and it ran clear over smooth stones. Cottonwood trees grew along the banks, their leaves rustling in the hot breeze, providing blessed shade from the relentless sun. They sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of Quinn's shoulder near hers. For a while they did not talk, just listened to the sound of the creek and the birds in the trees. It was peaceful in a way that Clara had not experienced in a long time, and she felt some of the constant tension she carried begin to ease. "Can I ask you something?" Quinn's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Clara tensed despite herself. "Of course. You seem sad sometimes, like you are carrying something heavy." He looked at her directly, those whiskey-colored eyes full of concern. "I do not mean to pry, but I want you to know that if you ever need to talk, I am a good listener." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him, wanted to unburden herself of the secret that weighed on her every day. But fear held her back, the same fear that had driven her all the way from Kansas to Nevada, that made her lie about where she had come from and what she had done. "Everyone has things they would rather forget," she said carefully. "I am no different. That is true enough." Quinn picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "I have things in my past I am not proud of. Times when I made the wrong choice, hurt people I cared about. But I have learned that running from those things does not make them go away. They just follow you, getting heavier the farther you carry them." His words struck deep, hitting truths Clara had been trying to avoid. She looked at him, this man she had known for less than a week, and saw only honesty in his face. "What if the things you did were so bad that telling someone would make them leave?" she asked softly. "What if the truth would ruin everything?" Quinn turned to face her fully. "Then I would say that anyone worth having in your life will care more about who you are now than who you were before. And if they cannot see that, then they were not the right person anyway." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly that it hurt. But she had seen the way people looked at women like her, the judgment and disgust. She had been called names that still made her flinch to remember, had been treated as less than human by men who thought they were better than her. "You are a good man, Quinn Harlow," she said instead of the confession that wanted to spill out. "Your ranch is lucky to have you." If Quinn noticed her deflection, he did not push. He simply smiled and said, "And Hamilton is lucky to have a talented seamstress. Mrs. Henderson was singing your praises at the store, said you fixed her daughter's wedding dress after the girl spilled wine all down the front." The moment of tension passed, and they fell back into easier conversation. But Clara could feel something building between them, a connection that went deeper than simple attraction. Quinn made her laugh with stories about his ornery cattle and Pete's colorful language. She told him about growing up in Ohio, carefully editing out the parts that came after, focusing on happy childhood memories that felt safe to share. The sun was lowering in the sky when they finally walked back to town. Quinn left his wagon at the general store and insisted on walking Clara back to the boarding house. At her door, he took her hand gently, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. May I court you, Miss Hayes?" Clara's heart stuttered. She should say no. She should protect this good man from the scandal that would erupt if anyone discovered her past. But when she looked into Quinn's eyes and saw the hope there, the genuine care, she could not make herself refuse him. "Yes," she whispered, "I would like that." Quinn's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so sweet and old-fashioned that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Next Saturday, then. I will take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant." "Next Saturday," Clara agreed. She watched him walk away again, but this time she did not feel the same lightness she had before. Guilt gnawed at her, heavy and cold in her stomach. Quinn deserved to know the truth about her, deserved to make his choice with full knowledge of who she really was. But Clara was too afraid to tell him, too terrified of losing this chance at happiness before it had even begun. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and made a silent promise to herself. She would be worthy of Quinn's regard. She would be the woman he believed her to be, good and honest and true. And maybe, if she tried hard enough and was lucky enough, the past would stay buried where it belonged. The weeks that followed were the happiest Clara had known in years. Quinn came to town every Saturday without fail, and they spent long hours together, walking by the creek, having dinner at the hotel, sitting on Mrs. Patterson's porch in the evenings while the sun set behind the mountains. Quinn was a gentleman in every sense of the word, never pushing for more than Clara was comfortable giving, content to hold her hand and steal the occasional chaste kiss. Clara fell in love with him slowly, and then all at once. She loved the way he talked about his dreams for the ranch, the care he showed for his animals, the respect he gave to everyone he met regardless of their station. She loved his laugh, deep and genuine, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She loved how safe she felt with him, how he made her believe that maybe she could have a future after all. It was late September when Quinn invited her to see the ranch. He had been working on the house, he said, fixing it up and making it livable, and he wanted her opinion on what else needed to be done. Clara agreed eagerly, thrilled at the chance to see the place Quinn spoke about with such pride and affection. They rode out on a Sunday morning, Clara sitting beside Quinn on the wagon seat, their thighs pressed together as they bounced over the rough road. The Ruby Valley spread out before them, a high desert basin ringed by mountains, with grass turning golden in the autumn sun. Quinn's ranch sat against the eastern slope, where a creek ran year-round and cottonwoods grew thick. The house was small, just 4 rooms, but it was solidly built with good timber and a stone chimney. Quinn had been working hard on it. Clara could see that immediately. The porch had been repaired, new glass in the windows, fresh whitewash on the walls. Inside, the rooms were clean and simply furnished with a kitchen, a sitting room and 2 bedrooms. "It is not much yet," Quinn said, watching her reaction carefully. "But I am adding on next spring, building out the back for a bigger kitchen and maybe another bedroom or 2. "It is wonderful," Clara said honestly, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "You have done so much with it already. It feels like a real home." "That is what I hoped you would say." Quinn stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "Clara, I know we have not been courting long and I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel. I am in love with you. I have been since that first day when you looked at me from behind that rain barrel, scared but trying so hard to be brave." Clara's breath caught. She had known this was coming, had felt it in every look and touch, but hearing him say the words made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I love you too," she whispered, because it was true and because she could not hold it back any longer. Quinn's smile was brilliant. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking her cheeks with infinite gentleness. "Then marry me, Clara Hayes. Be my wife. Help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Everything Clara wanted was right there in front of her, close enough to touch. A home, a husband who loved her, a future free from the shadows of her past. But the guilt that had been her constant companion for months rose up sharp and bitter, making it impossible to simply say yes without confession. "Quinn, I need to tell you something first." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "Something about my past, about who I was before I came here." Quinn's expression grew serious. "All right, I am listening." Clara pulled away, needing distance to say what had to be said. She walked to the window, looking out at the ranch that could have been hers, steeling herself for the moment when Quinn would look at her with disgust instead of love. "I told you I came from Ohio, but that was a lie. I came from Kansas, from Dodge City." She took a shaky breath. "And before that, I worked in a saloon. Not serving drinks or dealing cards. I was one of the girls upstairs. Do you understand what I am telling you?" The silence behind her was deafening. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, waiting for Quinn to speak, to tell her to leave, to take back his proposal and his love. Instead, she heard footsteps, and then Quinn was there beside her, his presence solid and warm. "How long?" he asked quietly. 2 years. From the time I was 18 until a few months before I came here." Clara kept her eyes on the mountains, unable to look at him. "My parents died when I was 17. They had debts I did not know about. The bank took the farm and I had nothing, no family, no money, nowhere to go. A woman approached me at the train station, said she could give me a job, a place to stay. I was desperate and I believed her. And you worked in the saloon for 2 years." It was not a question, and there was no judgment in Quinn's tone, just a request for understanding. "Yes." "In Dodge City at first, then in Abilene. I hated every day of it, but I did not know how to leave, did not think I could do anything else." Clara's voice broke, but she pushed on. "Then one of the girls I worked with managed to save enough money to leave. She went to San Francisco to start over, and it made me realize I could do the same. So I saved every penny I could, and when I had enough, I left. I came to Nevada because it was far away and because I thought no one would know me here. I taught myself to sew, became someone different, someone decent. But I cannot marry you without telling you the truth, Quinn. You deserve to know who I really am." Clara finally turned to face him, bracing herself for what she would see, but Quinn was not looking at her with disgust or anger. His eyes were sad, yes, but also filled with the same care and affection they had always held. "Are you done with that life?" he asked. "Is it truly behind you?" "Yes," Clara answered without hesitation. "I never want to go back to that. I would rather die than return to what I was." Quinn reached for her hands, holding them firmly when she tried to pull away. "Then I only have one thing to say to you, Clara Hayes. That was before you were mine." The words struck Clara like a physical blow. She stared at Quinn, unable to process what she was hearing. "What?" "That life, those years. They were before you were mine, before I knew you, before I loved you. They do not change how I feel." Quinn pulled her closer, his eyes intense and sincere. "You did what you had to do to survive. You were alone and frightened, and you made the best choice you could with what you had. I will not judge you for that, and I will not let anyone else judge you either." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "How can you still want me? How can you not be disgusted by what I did?" "Because I love you, not your past. I love the woman who works hard every day, who is kind to everyone she meets, who looks at the world like it still has good things to offer despite everything she has been through." Quinn wiped her tears with his thumbs, gentle and patient. "You are brave and strong and beautiful, Clara, and I am asking you again. Will you marry me?" Clara could barely see him through her tears, but she could feel his solid presence, his unwavering support. This man who knew the worst about her and chose to love her anyway, who saw past her mistakes to the person she was trying to become. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. "Yes," she sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinn Harlow." Quinn caught her up, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he kissed her, and it was different from the chaste kisses they had shared before. This was deeper, full of promise and passion and commitment. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring years of loneliness and fear into the embrace, letting Quinn's love burn it all away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "We will get married as soon as possible. I want you here with me, want to wake up every morning knowing you are mine and I am yours." "Yes," Clara agreed, because she wanted that too, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. They spent the rest of the day at the ranch, making plans for their future. Quinn showed her the land, the barn where he kept his horses, the pastures where his small herd of cattle grazed. They walked hand in hand along the creek, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying being together without secrets between them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Quinn pulled Clara close and said, "I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice. I will keep you safe and happy, and I will love you until my last breath." Clara believed him. For the first time since she was 17 years old, she believed in the future, in happiness, in love that did not demand a price. She kissed Quinn again, there in the golden light of the Nevada evening, and felt like she was finally coming home. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Hamilton. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, white muslin with lace at the collar and sleeves, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Quinn had picked for her that morning. Mrs. Patterson stood as her witness, wiping tears throughout the entire ceremony, while Pete stood for Quinn, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and slicked-back hair. The minister pronounced them man and wife, and when Quinn kissed her, Clara felt the last chains of her past fall away. She was no longer the frightened girl who had sold herself to survive. She was Clara Harlow, wife to a good man, partner in building a life worth living. The reception was held at the hotel dining room, a modest affair with cake and punch and a handful of friends. Clara was surprised by how many people came, neighbors from nearby ranches, women whose dresses she had mended, shopkeepers who had grown fond of her in the months she had lived in Hamilton. They seemed genuinely happy for her, and Clara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the Nevada heat. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Quinn leaned close and whispered, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Harlow?" The name sent a thrill through Clara. Mrs. Harlow. She was married, truly and legally bound to this man who loved her. "Yes," she said. "Let me get my things from the boarding house. Already taken care of." Quinn's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Pete moved your belongings to the ranch this morning while we were at the church." "Everything you own is already in our bedroom," Clara laughed, delighted by his presumption and planning. "You were very sure I would marry you. I was hopeful." Quinn pulled her to her feet and tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow. "And I am a man who believes in being prepared." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon, Clara's wedding dress glowing white in the moonlight. The ride to the ranch felt different from all the times before, charged with anticipation, and the knowledge that this was truly the beginning of their shared life. Quinn drove with one hand, the other holding Clara's, his thumb making slow circles on her palm. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, but Quinn had left a lamp burning in the window, a welcoming light to guide them home. He helped Clara down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "Quinn," Clara gasped, clinging to his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold? It is tradition." He grinned at her, looking younger and happier than she had ever seen him, and carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. Inside, he set her down gently, and they stood together in the soft lamplight, suddenly shy despite all their planning and anticipation. Clara smoothed her dress, nervous in a way she had not expected to be. She had known men before, many men, but this was different. This was Quinn, her husband, and it mattered in a way nothing had mattered before. Quinn seemed to sense her nervousness. He took her hands and kissed them, one after the other. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. We can just sleep if that is what you need." The kindness of the offer only made Clara love him more. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want this, Quinn. I want you." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Clara let herself sink into him. Quinn's hands were gentle as he unpinned her hair, letting it fall in dark waves down her back. Clara's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, exposing the muscled chest beneath, tanned from working in the sun. They undressed each other slowly, taking their time, learning the geography of each other's bodies. When they finally came together in the big bed that Quinn had built with his own hands, it was nothing like what Clara had known before. There was no transaction here, no performance or pretense. There was only love and tenderness, and a passion that burned clean and bright. Quinn touched her like she was precious, kissed her like she was the only woman in the world, and when he moved inside her, Clara felt tears slip down her temples because it was so different, so right, so completely perfect. Afterward they lay tangled together, Clara's head on Quinn's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His hand stroked her hair, gentle and rhythmic, and Clara felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." Quinn's voice was rough with emotion. "You are mine now, Clara, my wife, my partner, my heart, and I am yours completely and forever." Clara turned her face into his chest and let herself cry, but these were good tears, cleansing tears that washed away the last remnants of shame and fear. Quinn held her through it, stroking her hair and murmuring words of love and comfort, and when the tears finally stopped, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Clara dreamed of the future for the first time in longer than she could remember. The months that followed were not without their challenges. Running a ranch was hard work, demanding long hours and constant attention. Clara learned to cook on the wood stove, to tend the chickens Quinn brought home from town, to help with the endless tasks that came with living so far from town. Her hands, once soft from sewing, grew calloused from hauling water and weeding the vegetable garden she planted behind the house. But Clara had never been happier. She woke each morning to Quinn's kiss, fell asleep each night in his arms, and spent her days building a home that was truly hers. She still did some sewing, making clothes for Quinn and curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed. But her main focus was the ranch, helping Quinn turn his dream into reality. Pete, who lived in a small cabin near the barn, became like family. He was gruff and rough-spoken, but he had a good heart and treated Clara with respect. He taught her to ride properly, to handle the horses without fear, and shared his considerable knowledge about cattle and ranching. Clara made him special meals and mended his clothes, and Pete repaid her by being fiercely protective of her reputation. One cold November afternoon, Clara was in town buying supplies when she overheard two women talking in low voices near the dry goods section. "I heard she used to work in a saloon," one of them said, her tone dripping with judgment. "In Kansas before she came here. One of those women, you know." "Well, I am not surprised," the other replied. No decent woman would come all this way alone. Poor Mr. Harlow, he probably does not even know what kind of woman he married. Clara's hands froze on the bolt of fabric she had been examining. Her heart raced and she felt the old fear rise up, cold and choking. Someone knew. Someone had found out. Her secret was not safe after all. She turned to face the women, both wives of prosperous miners dressed in their fine store-bought dresses. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice shaking only slightly. "I could not help but overhear you. If you have something to say about me, I would appreciate you saying it to my face." The women had the grace to look embarrassed, but the first one, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Dobson, lifted her chin defiantly. "We were just discussing the rumors we have heard, Mrs. Harlow. Surely you cannot blame people for talking." "Rumors," Clara repeated, fighting to keep her composure. "And what exactly do these rumors say? That you worked in a saloon in Dodge City? That you were one of those women who entertained men for money?" Mrs. Dobson's eyes were hard. "Is it true?" Clara's first instinct was to deny it, to lie and save herself. But she thought of Quinn, of his words that day at the ranch. "That was before you were mine." She thought of the life they were building, founded on honesty and love, and she knew she could not start protecting it with lies. "Yes," she said clearly. "It is true. I worked in a saloon for 2 years because I had no family, no money, and no other options. I did what I had to do to survive, and I am not ashamed of doing what was necessary to stay alive." The second woman gasped, and Mrs. Dobson's face flushed with vindictive satisfaction. "Well, I am sure Mr. Harlow will be very interested to hear that he married a common prostitute." "My husband already knows." Clara's voice was steady now, strengthened by the truth. "I told him everything before we married, and he loves me anyway. So whatever you think you are accomplishing by spreading these rumors, you are wasting your time." She turned and walked away, leaving the women sputtering behind her. Her hands were still shaking as she paid for her purchases and loaded them into the wagon, but there was also a fierce pride burning in her chest. She had not run, had not lied, had not let them make her feel small. She had stood up for herself and for the life she had chosen. When she got home and told Quinn what had happened, he was furious. "Who were these women? I will go into town right now and set them straight." "No," Clara said firmly, putting her hand on his arm. "That will only make things worse. Let them talk, Quinn. The people who matter, the people who are truly our friends, they will not care." But Quinn was not satisfied. The next Sunday, when they went into town for church, he made a point of holding Clara's hand as they walked down the main street, greeting everyone they passed with friendly determination. When they entered the church, he led her to a pew near the front, sitting tall and proud beside her. Clara could feel the stares, could hear the whispers, but Quinn's presence gave her courage. When the minister began his sermon, speaking of judgment and forgiveness and loving thy neighbor, Clara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. After the service, as they stood outside greeting friends, Mrs. Patterson approached with several other women. Clara braced herself for more judgment, but instead, Mrs. Patterson took her hands warmly. "Clara, dear, I wanted to tell you how much I admire your courage," the older woman said. "It takes strength to leave a difficult situation and build a new life. You should be proud of yourself." The other women nodded in agreement, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know. Not everyone was as kind. Some people did stop speaking to them, did cross the street to avoid passing too close." But Clara was surprised by how many people did not care, or who cared more about the person she was now than what she had done before. Slowly, the gossip died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher sources of speculation. Through it all, Quinn never wavered. He defended Clara fiercely to anyone who spoke against her, made sure everyone knew she was his wife and would be treated with respect. His loyalty and love never faltered, and Clara fell more in love with him every day. Winter came to the Ruby Valley, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in white and temperatures that dropped below zero. Clara learned to bank the fire so it would burn all night, to cook hearty stews that would warm them from the inside, to layer clothes against the biting wind. She and Quinn spent long evenings in front of the fireplace, Quinn carving new handles for tools while Clara sewed, both of them content in companionable silence. It was during one of those quiet evenings in January that Clara realized she had not had her monthly courses in over 2 months. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise Quinn's hopes if she was wrong, but when a 3rd month passed and she began to feel sick in the mornings, she knew she had to tell him. She waited until after dinner one night when they were settled by the fire and the wind was howling outside. "Quinn, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the piece of leather he was working, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." Clara took a deep breath, nervous despite knowing how much Quinn wanted this. "I think I am going to have a baby." The leather fell from Quinn's hands. He stared at her, his face going through a rapid series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. "Truly, you are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor." "I have missed my courses for 3 months, and I have been sick every morning." Clara smiled, her own happiness bubbling up. "We are going to have a baby, Quinn." Quinn crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around just as he had the day she agreed to marry him. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, you have made me the happiest man alive." He set her down gently, immediately concerned. "Should you be on your feet? Should you be resting? What do you need?" Clara laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I am fine, Quinn. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I do not need to be wrapped in cotton wool." But Quinn insisted on taking over more of the household tasks, refusing to let Clara lift anything heavy or work too hard. He rode into town the next day and came back with the doctor, who examined Clara and confirmed what she already knew. She was indeed with child, due sometime in late July or early August. The news spread through the community quickly, and Clara was touched by the number of women who came to visit, bringing advice and baby clothes and offers of help. Even some of the women who had shunned her after the rumors came out softened toward her now that she was going to be a mother. Clara accepted their overtures with grace, choosing to focus on the future rather than dwelling on past hurts. As winter gave way to spring, Clara's body changed, her belly growing round with their child. Quinn was fascinated by every development, constantly touching her stomach and talking to the baby. He added on to the house as he had promised, building a bigger kitchen and a nursery with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Clara spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny gowns and blankets, stocking the nursery with the things they would need. She felt the baby move for the first time in April, a flutter like butterfly wings that made her cry with joy. When she took Quinn's hand and placed it on her belly so he could feel it too, the look on his face was something she would treasure forever. Summer arrived hot and dry, and Clara grew increasingly uncomfortable as the baby grew larger. She could no longer ride or do much of the physical work around the ranch, so she focused on lighter tasks, cooking and mending and tending her garden. Quinn hovered constantly, worried about her and the baby, refusing to leave the ranch for more than a few hours at a time. The baby came on a sweltering August evening, 2 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Clara's pain started after dinner, mild at first but growing steadily stronger. Quinn sent Pete racing into town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Patterson, then stayed by Clara's side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Clara had never experienced pain like this, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. But through it all, Quinn was there, steady and calm, encouraging her when she wanted to give up, reminding her how strong she was. Just after dawn, with the doctor's help and Mrs. Patterson's experienced guidance, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment she heard his first cry, loud and indignant, all the pain disappeared, replaced by a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Harlow." Clara looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers, and started to cry. Quinn leaned over them both, his own eyes wet with tears, and kissed Clara's forehead. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for giving me this." They named him William after Quinn's father, with the middle name of James. Will, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged. Clara spent hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle of him, at the fact that she and Quinn had created this tiny person. Quinn was a devoted father from the start. He would get up in the night when Will cried, bringing him to Clara to nurse, and then walking him around the room until he fell back asleep. He built a cradle that rocked with the gentlest touch and carved toys that Will would not be able to use for years. His love for his son was evident in every look and touch, and Clara's heart swelled watching them together. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Quinn's herd grew, his reputation for raising quality cattle spreading throughout the region. Clara proved to have a talent for keeping the books, tracking expenses and income with meticulous care. Together, they built the ranch into a successful operation, one that provided a comfortable life for their growing family. Will was followed by a daughter they named Sarah 2 years later, and then another son, Matthew, 3 years after that. The house was expanded again and again, growing to accommodate their family, filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. Clara had never imagined she could be so happy, that life could offer so much after such a dark beginning. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning early to ride and work the ranch. Will inherited his father's love of cattle and horses, following Quinn around from the time he could walk. Sarah was fierce and independent, refusing to be left behind when her brothers went out to work. Matthew was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for reading and learning that surprised them all. Clara taught all 3 children to read and write, using the Bible and the few books they owned. She told them stories of her childhood in Ohio, of the farm where she grew up and the parents who had loved her. She did not tell them about the years in between, about the saloons and the men and the desperation that had driven her. That was her past and Quinn's, and it belonged to them alone. The children knew their mother had come from somewhere else, that she had lived in Kansas before meeting their father, but they did not know the details and never thought to ask. To them, Clara was simply their mother, loving and patient and always there when they needed her. One evening when Will was 12, Sarah was 10, and Matthew was 7, they all sat around the dinner table after a long day of work. Quinn said grace and they began to eat, the conversation flowing easily as it always did. They talked about the cattle, about the new foal in the barn, about the book Matthew was reading. As Clara listened to her family, to the voices of the people she loved most in the world, she felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark years in the saloons, this sense of belonging and purpose and love. She had not believed it was possible for someone like her, had thought she was too ruined, too broken to ever have anything good. But Quinn had shown her differently. He had looked past her mistakes to the woman beneath, had loved her not despite her past but simply because of who she was. And in doing so, he had given her back her life, her hope, her future. That night, after the children were in bed and she and Quinn were alone in their room, Clara turned to her husband and said, "I need you to know how grateful I am. For everything you have given me, for the life we have built together." Quinn pulled her close, his arms strong and familiar around her. "You do not need to thank me, Clara. You have given me just as much. You have made me a better man, a happier man. This ranch, our children, our life together, it is everything I ever wanted, even knowing what I was." Clara asked softly, even though she knew the answer, "Especially knowing what you were." Quinn tipped her face up so he could look into her eyes. "Because it means I know how strong you are, how much courage it took to leave that life and build something new. You are the bravest person I know, Clara Harlow, and I fall more in love with you every single day." Clara kissed him then, pouring 20 years of love and gratitude into the embrace. They had been married for 15 years, had weathered storms and struggles and the occasional hardship that came with ranching life. But through it all, their love had remained constant, a foundation that could not be shaken. As they lay together afterward, Clara's head on Quinn's chest and his hand stroking her hair, she thought about how different her life could have been. If she had not been brave enough to leave Kansas, if she had not come to Hamilton, if Quinn had not been in that street the day the miners started shooting. So many small choices and chances that had led her here, to this moment, to this happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked quietly. "About how lucky I am, about how close I came to missing all of this." Clara pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "About how much I love you too." Quinn's voice was sleepy content. "Always have, always will. You are mine, Clara, my wife, my love, my heart. And I am yours." Clara closed her eyes, secure in his arms, and drifted off to sleep. She dreamed of the future, of watching their children grow and marry and have families of their own, of growing old with Quinn on the ranch they had built together. Good dreams, happy dreams, the kind she had never dared to imagine in those dark days before Quinn had walked into her life and changed everything. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons and growth and change. Will grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibility at the ranch as Quinn began to slow down. Sarah married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, a good man who loved her fierce spirit and matched her stubborn independence. Matthew surprised them all by deciding to become a teacher, moving to Carson City to attend the normal school there. Quinn and Clara became grandparents when Sarah had her first child, a girl with her mother's dark hair and determined chin. They were grandparents 3 more times after that, and each time Clara held a new baby in her arms, she marveled at the legacy they had created, at the family that had sprung from the love between a broken woman and the cowboy who had seen her worth. Pete passed away when he was nearly 80, dying peacefully in his sleep one winter night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Quinn carved a simple headstone that read, "Here lies Pete Johnson, faithful friend and cowboy. The ranch will miss you." Clara planted wildflowers on the grave every spring, remembering the gruff old man who had accepted her without question and taught her so much about this life she had chosen. There were hard years mixed in with the good. A drought one summer that killed half their herd. A winter so brutal that they lost count of how many cattle froze. The year Will broke his leg and was laid up for months. The year Sarah's husband died suddenly, leaving her a widow with 3 children to raise alone. But through every hardship, Quinn and Clara faced it together, their partnership stronger than any challenge life could throw at them. Clara was 53 years old when Quinn first complained about the pain in his chest. She made him go see the doctor, who told them what they had both feared. Quinn's heart was weak, damaged by years of hard work and the simple passage of time. There was nothing to be done except rest and take things easy, advice that Quinn ignored more often than not. "I am not an invalid," he would say when Clara tried to make him sit down. "I have work to do." But Clara could see him slowing down, could see the way he pressed his hand to his chest when he thought no one was looking. She began taking over more of the physical work, with Will's help, and gradually convinced Quinn to let go of some of his responsibilities. It was hard for him, this strong man who had built the ranch with his own hands, but he did it for her, to ease her worry. They were sitting on the porch one evening in late September, watching the sun set behind the mountains, when Quinn took Clara's hand and said, "I want you to know that these have been the best years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift, Clara. I hope you know that." Clara's throat tightened at the finality in his tone. "Quinn, do not talk like that. You are going to be fine." "Maybe, maybe not." He squeezed her hand gently. "But either way, I need you to hear this. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day in Hamilton. I was just going through the motions before I met you, working toward a future that felt empty because I had no one to share it with. And then there you were, brave and beautiful and scared, and I knew immediately that you were meant to be mine." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I love you so much, Quinn Harlow. You gave me everything. You gave me a life worth living. And you gave me the same." Quinn lifted her hand and kissed it, just as he had that first day when he asked to court her. "Promise me that if something happens to me, you will not stop living. You will not let the past drag you back down. You will remember how strong you are, how much you have overcome." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Clara insisted, even though she knew it was a lie. They were both getting older and Quinn's heart was failing. It was only a matter of time. "Promise me, Clara." "I promise." She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. "But I am not ready to let you go yet. I need you, Quinn. I will always need you. I know, love, I know." He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, and they sat like that until the night grew too cold and they had to go inside. Quinn made it through the winter, though there were several scares when his pain grew so bad Clara was certain he would not survive the night. But every time he rallied, his stubborn will to live matching his body's determination to keep going. Spring came, and with it Quinn seemed to improve, growing stronger as the weather warmed and the ranch came back to life. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in October, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Will had taken over running the ranch, and he was doing a fine job of it, expanding the operation and implementing new ideas. Sarah had recovered from her husband's death and was raising her children with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. Matthew came home from Carson City with his new wife, a quiet girl who taught alongside him at the school. The house was full of noise and laughter. 3 generations of Harlows gathered under one roof. Clara cooked for days preparing the feast, and they ate outside under the cottonwood trees, telling stories and making toasts. When Quinn stood to speak, his voice still strong despite his weakening body, everyone fell silent. 30 years ago today, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known," Quinn said, looking directly at Clara. "She has been my partner, my best friend, my greatest joy. She has given me children and grandchildren, has helped me build this ranch into something we can all be proud of. But more than that, she has taught me what it means to love without judgment, to see the best in people even when the world sees only their mistakes." He raised his glass. To Clara, my wife, my heart, my everything. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Everyone cheered and drank, but Clara could only sit with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the love of this man and the life they had built together. Quinn came to her side and pulled her to her feet, and they danced under the stars while their family watched and clapped, moving slowly to music only they could hear. It was the last truly happy day they would have together. 2 weeks later, Quinn's pain returned worse than ever, and this time he did not rally. The doctor came and shook his head, telling Clara there was nothing more to be done except to keep him comfortable. Will brought Quinn's bed down to the sitting room so he could look out the window at the ranch he loved, and Clara sat beside him hour after hour, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. Quinn drifted in and out, sometimes lucid and sometimes lost in memories. But even in his confusion, he never forgot Clara. He would squeeze her hand and say her name, would smile when she kissed his forehead, would tell her he loved her a dozen times a day. One clear November morning, with the sun streaming through the window and the mountains standing sharp against the blue sky, Quinn opened his eyes and looked at Clara with perfect clarity. "There you are," he said softly. "My beautiful Clara. I am here, love. I am always here." Clara stroked his hair back from his forehead, her touch gentle. "Do not cry," Quinn whispered, though tears were already streaming down Clara's face. "This is not an ending, just a different kind of beginning. I will be waiting for you, Clara. However long it takes, I will be waiting." "Quinn, please." Clara could barely speak through her tears. "Please do not leave me. I have to, love. But you are going to be all right. You are the strongest person I know, remember?" He lifted his hand, shaking now, and cupped her cheek. "You gave me the best 30 years of my life." "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for loving me, for choosing me, for being mine." "I will always be yours," Clara sobbed. "Always, Quinn. In this life and the next." Quinn smiled, that beautiful smile she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "That was before you were mine," he said, echoing the words that had changed both their lives. "But now you are mine forever, and I am yours. Remember that, Clara. Remember that love does not end just because life does." His eyes closed then, and his hand fell away from her face. Clara felt him take one more breath, then another, and then nothing. She sat frozen for a long moment, unable to accept that he was gone, that the man who had been her whole world for 30 years had just slipped away. Then the grief hit her, a wave so powerful it drove her to her knees beside the bed. She clutched Quinn's hand and wept, great tearing sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul. Will came running at the sound, and then Sarah, and they held their mother while she cried for the man they had all loved so much. They buried Quinn on the hill next to Pete, with a view of the ranch stretching out below. Half the county came to the funeral, ranchers and townspeople and families who had known the Harlows for decades. They spoke of Quinn's integrity, his fairness, his willingness to help anyone in need. They told stories that made people laugh and cry, painting a picture of a man who had lived his life with honor and died with the love of his family surrounding him. Clara stood at the graveside, flanked by her children, and listened to them talk about the man she had loved. She thought about the day they met, about his calm voice and steady presence in the middle of chaos. She thought about his proposal at the ranch, about the way he had looked at her when she confessed her past. She thought about 30 years of laughter and love, of building a life together, of the family they had created. And she thought about his final words, about the promise he had made to wait for her, and she found a small measure of peace in that. The months after Quinn's death were the hardest of Clara's life. She had survived poverty and desperation, had endured shame and judgment, but nothing had prepared her for the hollow ache of losing her husband. Everything reminded her of him: the chair where he sat in the evenings, the boots by the door, the indentation in the pillow where his head had rested beside hers for 30 years. But Clara had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. She did not let herself sink into despair, did not allow the grief to consume her. Instead, she focused on the ranch, on her children and grandchildren, on continuing the work she and Quinn had started together. Will ran the ranch with his mother's advice, and together they kept it thriving. Sarah moved back to the main house with her children, her presence filling some of the emptiness. Matthew visited when he could, bringing his wife and their new baby, a boy they named Quinn in honor of his grandfather. Clara threw herself into her grandchildren, teaching them to read and telling them stories about their grandfather. She wanted them to know Quinn not just as a memory, but as a real person, flawed and human but so full of love. She told them about his dreams for the ranch, about his kindness and courage, about the way he had seen the best in people. And sometimes, late at night when she was alone in the bed she had shared with Quinn for so long, Clara would tell him about her day, speaking into the darkness as if he could hear her. She told him about Will's success with the new breeding program, about Sarah's daughter learning to ride, about Matthew's promotion at the school. She told him how much she missed him, how the world felt dimmer without his presence. She never told him that she regretted those years in the saloons, the past that had haunted her for so long. Because Quinn had taught her that those years did not define her, that she was more than her mistakes. He had loved her not in spite of her past, but because of everything she had overcome, and that love had transformed her life. Clara lived for another 20 years after Quinn's death, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and several great-grandchildren born. She remained sharp and active almost until the end, still helping with the ranch books, still tending her garden, still the heart of the family that had grown from the love between a cowboy and a saloon girl who had both been looking for something more. On a warm June morning in 1928, Clara woke in her bed and knew immediately that this was her last day. She was not afraid. She called her children to her side and spent the day telling them goodbye, making sure they knew how much she loved them and how proud she was of the people they had become. "Your father would be so proud too," she told them, her voice weak but clear. "He loved you all so much." As the sun began to set, Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift. She thought of Ohio and the farm where she had been born. She thought of Kansas and the hard years that had shaped her. She thought of Nevada and the silver town where her life had truly begun. And most of all, she thought of Quinn. She could almost see him standing in the golden light, his hand outstretched, that beautiful smile on his face. She could hear his voice, warm and familiar, calling her home. Clara reached for him, and as she did, she heard his words one last time, the words that had saved her and made her whole. "That was before you were mine." And then she was his again, finally and forever, and nothing else mattered. The Harlow Ranch continued for generations after Clara's death, passed down through the family she and Quinn had built. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land, still raise cattle in the Ruby Valley, still tell stories about the couple who founded it all. They speak of Quinn's integrity and Clara's courage, of a love that overcame judgment and hardship to create something lasting and true. In the small cemetery on the hill, 2 headstones stand side by side, weathered by time but still legible. Quinn Harlow, the stone reads, "Beloved husband, father, and rancher." And beside it, Clara Harlow, "Beloved wife, mother, and heart of our home." But those who knew them best, who heard the stories passed down through the years, know that the real epitaph for both of them is simpler. Two souls who found each other against all odds, who chose love over judgment, who built a legacy that would outlast them both. They were each other's beginning, middle, and end, bound together by words that held more power than any formal vow. That was before you were mine. And in being his, in letting herself be loved despite her past and her fear, Clara Hayes had found redemption, purpose, and a happiness she had never believed possible. She had learned that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that the future mattered more than the past, and that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful lives. The ranch still stands as testament to their love. Acres of land worked by hands that carry their blood, buildings that shelter family born from their union. The creek still runs clear, the cottonwoods still rustle in the wind, and the mountains still stand eternal against the Nevada sky, watching over the legacy of a cowboy and his bride, whose love story began with bullets and fear and ended with a family that would echo through generations. Proof that redemption is real and love can conquer all.